Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last Ergonomics of 2025. Wow, literally wow. Um,
Yeah.
this year's just gone like that.
Mm.
It just always goes like that nowadays. Eh? In the studio today, Stephen Howe, as always,
I,
and Guy Osmond joining us as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Guy.
Good
What's
morning.
2025 been like for you? Different?
Well, all sorts of things. A few landmarks. I've actually been working for 50 years in May this year.
Congratulations, sir.
well done.
And a very big birthday, which we probably better not dwell on and move on rapidly from in November. So in terms of personal landmarks or sort of date marks, significant. Business interesting. I think, it's a difficult environment overall. Certainly in my 50 years of working, I've never known a situation where the global geopolitical situation is just so disruptive. And I was talking to one of our suppliers in the States last night and speak obviously to a lot of Europeans. I was speaking to somebody who's just come back from the Far East recently. And, there's just, it may or may not impact business day to day, but there's just that constant thing in the back of your mind. And maybe it's me, but I've found I've got more interested in politics, listening to more podcasts and stuff in the last 12 months or so than I have historically. I mean, I've always been interested, but not sort of trying to keep on top of things. Although, sometimes if you get in the car in the morning to drive to work and listen to a podcast, you start the day with a smile and you're pretty depressed before you even get to the office these days. So I listen to some car podcasts as well. But yeah,
I'm interested in that. How are you keeping up with politics, as it were? Because I just feel like most people have just switched off, and is that part of the problem, do you think?
Yeah, I think. I'm just trying to think how not to turn this into an hour talking politics. I know you'll stop me, Graham. You're good.
Yeah, I will.
Interrupting and redirecting, but so I think it just seems to me. I think the real problem is a very, very high proportion of people of all generations have just lost faith in politicians. And I think that's a problem. If you look in the UK specifically, that, whatever your political view is, you could, if you've been a Labour supporter all your life, I think you might be saying, well, I can't honestly say Labour are doing a very good job right now. If you've been a Conservative supporter all your life, then the last few years before the current government, it was very difficult there was a lot that you just couldn't defend. And the rise of other parties, the Green Party, the growth of that, and, with reform, which I prefer not to think about, I did worry that Europe is moving, there's a lot of moves towards the right. And that, I was talking to John Biggs from Kinesis on a meeting in the States last night. And I think the thing that has happened, and to some degree I blame social media, is the polarity. There just doesn't seem to be the scope for two people with differing views to sit down and have a rational discussion. Because whenever you do that, however disparate your views are overall, there is always common ground. And if you can find that common ground and start with that, what do you agree on? Then there's scope to sort of develop a coherent and valuable conversation.
Yeah,
but it just seems to me now that there's so many people just take a view where they have no interest or no belief in the recognition that maybe somebody else could have an opposing view, but have anything valid to say at all.
And I think you're right. I feel that is because almost having an agnostic view or trying to be a true journalist in any situation, because I feel like a lot of journalism isn't proper journalism these days, and actually trying to get both viewpoints and put both sides of the argument and allow people to decide is unpopular.
Yeah.
It's unpopular because the algorithm and people talk a lot about algorithms, but the algorithm to me is two things. It is how a platform or a machine, if you like, decides what's popular, but all it's seeing is like what people are gravitating to. So an algorithm is basically a group of people deciding that something's more popular than another, and but people gravitate towards, or seemingly gravitate towards, something that's slightly divisive or slight, is causing controversy or attention because it's interesting,
But I think the thing about that algorithm, it does push us all into echo chambers and the views we already hold. And I think somebody made a comment a couple of years ago. I read something that I hadn't really thought about before, but it's very easy to have really strong views about something you know almost nothing about. But as soon as you start to understand it and start to look at it in a more holistic way and take a sort of broader view, you suddenly realize, well, hang on, this situation, and Gaza is a good example. I'm not going to comment on any side of it, but that is a historic situation that goes back an incredibly long time, and there is no quick fix. And the Ukraine situation with the historic, all that area, Crimea and everything, a lot of that goes back. There's a lot of history in it. There's quite often in these things, there's tribal stuff, or there's religions, or there's all manner of things. And when you start to look at those things, you think, probably you will come down on one side or another. But you will actually, if you really look into it, they do have a point there. And we weren't very good about that. If you look at British history, globally, there's a lot we have no right to be proud of at all. So I do think that it's really easy if everything comes from a single tweet or a single Truth Social or something you saw on TikTok. It's really easy to feel strongly about something. There was a thing in the paper this morning about the woman, the couple who were seen on Coldplay on the discount thing.
Yes.
Well, it turns out that was the first time. I know they worked together and there's all those issues. They both were separated from their husbands or wives. It's the first time they had actually been out together. She'd been given the tickets by a friend and thought, who can I invite? And they were getting on really well at work. So the way that has built and grown, and she said, and it just went crazy. And then Gwyneth Paltrow doing a spoof thing for whatever the company was. It all just escalates out of all proportion. From a 16-second video, that's what started all. And there are loads of people who literally still swear at her in the streets and stuff, all this time on. And I suspect those people doing that, the sum total of what they know about fact is that video they've seen. And everything else is comment and stuff they've seen in that echo chamber, which by definition tends to push to extreme views.
I think Guy makes a really good point there about social media, because you look at anything, and the reason we're not probably having these in-depth conversations is people are drawn in by sound bites. People are making small 10 or 15-second videos that are going on Twitter or whatever, and people's opinion is based on that. They're not actually bothering to get into the detail. As you say, Guy, you look at all these sort of situations, people are picking a side based upon what they're hearing in that 10 or 15-second video or that very short tweet. Actually, when they get into it, there's a lot of, you can understand both sides of the argument, but it's those sort of small little sound bites that people are using for publicity that's driving that division.
Very, very dangerous. I've always said that, people always need to come out, they need to zoom out and give a wider view of anything that they're looking at, because we look at a microcosm all of the time. We see one snapshot moment, one thing. There was a example earlier on in the year on LinkedIn. Somebody manufactured that the business was failing in a post, and they immediately got a response that supposedly saved their business, right? But the whole thing was manufactured, right? It was a marketing ploy, But it's very easy now to create pseudo authenticity. You know, we can see what's drawing on the heartstrings of people, what makes people emotionally react, and if we just frame an apparent reality to look the same way, we might get a result out of it.
But do you remember before social media, was that guy Max Clifford, who I think with all sorts
Who
of
can forget Max?
But he used to put together a pop star or a soap star with a story about something else. And although again, and this is a judgment based on what I've read, so it may be without any facts, he seemed to be a truly odious man, but he was absolutely brilliant at pulling together 2 or 3 different factions and concocting this, caught in a hotel room or, whatever it was. And the whole thing was manufactured to create, and that was where he was really clever. He put together 2 or 3 completely separate bits of scenario and manufacture something that involved 2 or 3 different parties, all of whom wanted press. He got paid effectively 2 or 3 times for one piece of activity. And, the tabloids just loved it and lapped it all up. And I think what we're now seeing, the problem we're now seeing is almost anybody can do that. And going back to that, people commenting on the 16-second video that they've seen or the 30-second TikTok, what then happens is they see that, they arrive at a conclusion, and then they create something. And so that is based on that 30-second TikTok. So you're getting extrapolated. All this stuff comes, and there's a tiny sort of scintilla of actual facts right at the back of this. And then there's this sort of pyramid scheme of stuff that just grows out of it.
And arguably, although I'll be careful what I'm saying, even members of the royal family are guilty of it. I mean, it's it's always been there, hasn't it? It's always been there. This ability to kind of make the truth appear out of nowhere, and then we question what the truth is. Let's kind of bring this into ergonomics. Okay. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with a disruptive tech innovator who's just been in Rolling Stone magazine in the States. They did a piece on her because she was saying, she's developing an app to do with how we diarize our time and calendars, etc. And she said, well, every bit of technology that's out there at the moment still acts like a typewriter. Or a fax machine. It's very old fashioned in the way that we organize time. And she's looking at a solution using a lot of AI but also sort of human input as well, that starts to diarize our time around purpose and intent, purpose for us as much as anything else. And she said there's a lot of privacy issues with the current kind of diarization systems because you're sharing what you're doing in your day, right? And that gives other people a chance to look at it and go, well, why have they booked in? Why is that already, outlined there? What are they doing in that time? This kind of leads on to, do you feel like in 2026, do you feel, Guy, that we might get more into the ergonomics of communication a bit more?
Oh, that's a really big one. I think so. I'm really interested in this whole thing because I think I was actually, this is my 3rd podcast this month. It's been a busy month. And I think probably the last I shan't be doing something over Christmas. But I was in a conversation recently where we were talking about I tend to talk much more these days about human factors rather than ergonomics. I think certainly historically I've referred to ergonomics as the sort of physical stuff, talking about and that's what I've done for the last 30 odd years. But if you bring it into human factor, and I think the problem with ergonomics, a bit like words get sort of tagged. If you mention ergonomics to somebody who knows nothing about ergonomics, they think you're talking about chairs or maybe cars, and they don't realize just how enormous it is. So if you talk human factors, that sort of gives you a better indicator of the whole thing. So as soon as you get into that human factors thing, you get into then that what is the method of communication? And I'm sort of, I think probably both you guys know, I'm very interested in the insight system of actually profiling, psychometric profiling of people of the red, green, blue, yellow. And so you've got your introverts and your extroverts and have different ways of communicating with one another and different ways of thinking and processing. And that, of course, brings you straight into the whole neurodiversity conversation. Surprise, surprise, because that's something that looks, again, it's through a slightly different prism from the insight thing, but there's a lot of overlap in those different ideas. I know a lot of people are listening to this, and I'm waving my hands about a lot frantically here now. I'll sit on my hands to try and focus the attention. So I think if you talk about ergonomics in that human factors sense of communication, then I think it's already starting to happen, because I think a lot of organizations are now taking the view that you actually need to start looking at every individual as an individual. And I'm sitting there smugly saying, well, yeah, I've been saying that for 30 years. But actually, I mean, again, mostly in the context of in the physical environment, I admit. But if you extrapolate that out to the broader sense, I certainly think we need to be looking in the styles of communication, the content of communication. We all know that some people learn kinesthetically, some people, I can't remember all the terms, but some people like to write it down. And we also know that when you write it down, you remember much more than if you just listen and hopefully remember it. So all of that stuff, I think, fits into the way a lot of organizations we're talking to, which is probably quite a small subset of organizations generally, who are really looking at how are we communicating the message, whatever that message is. And so that could be about what are we doing about hybrid, and looking at ways to actually analyze people's different responses, how people think, how they describe it, whether they talk, that stuff that we all know about. Did people say, well, I think this, I think that, or are they the sort of person who say, I feel this, I feel that? Because those two simple words just immediately tell you that whichever way this person communicates, you should be talking to them slightly differently if it's one or other. So I think there's scope for it. I think some of it's already happening, but I would say there's a risk. I mean, we're here to talk about ergonomics, although we haven't done much of it yet, in fairness.
Or have we? Who knows?
Well, that's the whole point. That human factors thing is there in everything we do, and in our relationships, in how we work, what we do, how we choose our career. That's all affected by the sort of person we are, how driven we are, the opportunities we get, how we respond to those opportunities. So yes, there's some around, let's have lots more. But that would be ultimately, I'll bring it down to, if you're talking specifically about workplace, which is really what we're here to be doing, just keep remembering in everything you're doing, and whatever role you're in, whether it's HR, whether it's management, whether it's health and safety, occupational health, whatever, just remember everybody's an individual. And I think when we're in conversation with one another, we do that, individual conversations, but actually the larger the group of people you're addressing, the harder that becomes to manage, until a point where somebody consciously or unconsciously just starts ignoring it and just says, let's do it. Well, mandated return to work, classic example, you must come in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's what we're going to do. That is a decision made probably with lots of justification and evidence apparently provided. But ultimately, that's a decision made and then evidence to support the decision being sought. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that's a really easy decision to make from a corporate level. It's a really bad decision to have to respond to for many individuals.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. It's somebody who shall remain nameless, or a business that shall remain nameless.
Okay.
Well, Stephen's eyes were like,
yeah, hello.
Are constantly posting on LinkedIn at the moment about a cheat sheet for neurodivergence. I mean, I just personally just despair of that as we're in 2025. I can't believe in a way that we're still talking cheat sheets. Can you?
Well, I think
it's surprising, isn't it? You'd think the way I was going to say, the way everything now is the focus on individuals. The cheat sheets are just very much broad brush, aren't they? They're just box ticking ways of doing things, and you'd like to think the way we've moved on the conversation is around individuals.
I just think a cheat sheet shows an ignorance on behalf of management.
It's easy though, isn't it? It's easy.
I'm a manager. I know that I might have neurodivergent people on my team. I just want to find a way of dealing with them.
So I'm thinking. I agree with Stephen. It's a cop out. It's a quick, easy way to say, and sometimes even just to be seen to be doing something. Let's put a few posters up around the place so that people know we care.
Yeah.
Actually, it's all on scrolling screens now. Nobody has posters anymore. It's all done on screens in reception and in the canteen, in the corridors, everywhere you go. But I think my slight defense for it is if I am a manager who suddenly this has come into my field of vision, and I know that it's impacting me and some of my staff, a cheat sheet is an okay way to start. I think where it fails is actually, and I haven't seen these, I don't know specifically, and we don't need to know who you're talking about, but I think if that is being sold as, the Nirvana solution to everything, here's your grail, just give everybody a cheat sheet and it'll all be fine, then that is, that's a disastrous approach. It's a bit like, we were dealing with organizations who were proudly telling me in the early days of COVID, we're giving people an allowance to go and buy a desk and a chair. Usually it was a local authority and they're giving them £100 each, and they'd say to me, we're doing this with a big grin smile on their faces. And depending how desperate I was to do business with them, and at that stage, probably not at all, I'd be just saying, well, no, actually, it's just a copper. That's an abdication of responsibility. You're saying, here we've done something. Actually, you haven't applied any thought to it. You haven't actually put any strategy into it. You just said, here's a quick fix. And if you say, we've suddenly come into COVID, it's a panic. Let's do something immediately to make it correct. Okay, fair enough. But actually, if that's your answer to it and you're never going to revisit, that's a bad solution. And I think the cheat sheet is the same. If it's something that helps people to get going and start to sort of come to terms with, maybe recognize some behaviors that they see happening either with themselves or with a colleague, and if that enables them to open up a conversation, I think that could be it's if you draw it back to really basic ergonomics, the display screen equipment assessment form. I was talking to somebody recently about the fact that we have a statutory obligation to do an assessment, but we use that original we don't use the actual HSE document, but the original HSE document. That's a sort of roadmap for a conversation. Yes. Lots of people use it as a tick box because it's really easy to say, get people to tick the boxes. I've got 1,000 people who ticked all these boxes, and we've got them in a big stack of paper in a filing cabinet, which we're terrified to go and look at because we don't know how much problems are buried in it. But, they've fulfilled their obligation. They've carried out an assessment. They haven't fulfilled the ongoing conversation obligation. But actually, if you do that thing where you say, okay, let's have that cheat sheet, if you like, as a basis for a conversation, I think that's probably quite a useful tool.
Has that been your biggest frustration over all of the years that you've been doing this, which is that, and has that got worse? Taking it back to the beginning of the conversation about social media and the fact that we kind of truncate everything and we look towards one small piece of information, then we almost feel like we know the truth and we've dealt with it. I'll give you an example of this, which I don't think I've ever told you about. Many years ago, I went into an office and there was somebody that had one of your early posters up on the wall. to do with sitting positions and
the posture guide.
God, yeah, posture guide. And I went to see this lady, and she said, I've got terrible backache. And she said, but I've been doing what it said on that poster. And I went, I don't think you have. And she said, yes, I've been sat like that forever.
Yeah.
I said, well, you haven't quite understood what the poster's about, right? But she'd literally been sat at right angles and
yeah
forever, and hadn't moved, because she thought if she moved, then that's what would actually cause her the backache. And yeah, but yeah, I mean, this is obvious stuff. But the problem is,
did you give a guy's number to ask her to take up the issue with him, as it was him who designed it?
No, I didn't. I explained that Guy didn't mean that by that, and we had the educational talk. But the point is that if ultimately, if companies in a way only allow you in at touch points, and like just start like the cheat sheet thing, if they only buy into that, but then they stop and they don't see that this is the need for a constant dialogue, because you have to then, when you've informed people, you need to then understand how people have understood that information. And if you don't create a proper dialogue, you don't understand whether or not people have really understood or everything that they need to understand. Has one of the frustrations over the years been that people will buy into only a certain extent, but then they feel like they've probably done it, and they don't want to continue the dialogue on a kind of almost constant organic basis?
Yes, and that's a classic scenario of the training industry, isn't it? Where actually people say, I've done that CBT, or we've got somebody in. Oh yeah, when did you do that? Oh, and if it's not, there's some statutory stuff. You get your health and safety. You get your health and safety stuff is updated annually, and working at heights we've just redone, and bits and pieces like that. And interestingly, because there may be people who don't know this, I didn't know that our van drivers are working at heights. If it's and again, this is I'm owning up to something I should have known as an employer. But working at heights, I'd always pictured as basically you had to be on a ladder to be working at heights. That was my image of it. But if you're at a height where the fall could injure you, then you're working at heights. So if you've got anybody loading and unloading vans and getting in and out of the vans, as we obviously have, that's working at heights. So I found that out. We put it right, so I'm up to speed again on that one. But the whole thing about training is people absorb some stuff and forget it, and we get into bad postures. And I often, as you know, draw parallels with driving. How many people have been driving more than 2 years actually adopt a posture in their car is anything like what they were shown to adopt when they had their first driving lesson. And the same thing, we all slouch despite our knowledge. We need to be reminded. An interesting backstory on the posture guide. The posture guide originally emerged because when I was running the business myself, it was just me 30 odd years ago, I was doing assessments of people, going to see people and drawing little stick men with straight backs and curved backs. And I'm a rubbish artist, but people would say, I'd say you need to sit a bit like this with my stick person, and they'd say, well, I do. I'd say, actually, no, you don't. You sit like this, and I draw the how not to do it drawing.
Yeah.
And having done this, I don't know, 100 times, I thought we could get this printed and then get it done properly. And also, we included the best posture is your neck posture from a very early stage. So that thing about adopting one posture all day. But so coming back to the thing, I think there is this ongoing thing that that people, that a lot of training, a very high proportion of training in all topics that is done by employers, fulfills a statutory obligation or part of their ISO, whatever it is, but actually is of almost no value whatsoever, particularly if it's something they do regularly, because a bunch of people are wheeled into a room. Oh God, it's manual handling training again. It must be November because we do it every November, and they deliver the same thing. And so finding ways, and you know, there are a lot more opportunities these days. We've done a lot of our little videos as top tips, 30 seconds. You know, we don't do TikTok, but that style of thing for how to adjust your chair, or you know, how to get comfortable at home if you've only got a dining chair at the moment. But again, people think that's where do you go if they've got a dining chair and they've found a temporary solution. You're back to your cheat sheet. You know, we've given them one little cheat and they think they've solved it. I mean, they haven't. They've just actually made it better for a short while. So I think there's that big picture. So going back to your original question, how frustrated am I that people just don't damn well listen to me and haven't for years? Obviously, enormously
Very.
so. But, you know, I've become, actually, no, I was going to say I've become less angry about it, but I rant more and more as I get older. But there is that thing, isn't there, that actually you show people what's blindingly obvious, and particularly in the assessment process, when suddenly maybe even the chair they're in, you know, it's not replacing the chair, whatever, getting the screen to the right height. Let's keep it in the, you know, the specific DSE to simplify the conversation. But you get them into that posture where you say, how do you feel? And you don't actually need them to answer because their face has changed. Their face has lit up because suddenly, and even more so if they had a rubbish chair and it's replaced with a really good chair that's anthropometrically suitable for them. But then in all of that, we're talking about, and don't forget to get up and move. It's not just sitting and standing. It's about the movement. Do it regularly. We're now telling people to get up and move at least every 30 minutes now rather than hourly, which a lot of people are still doing. All of that stuff. And well, we're all guilty of it if we've ever been to a physio or a chiropractor. You know, you go and get the treatment, they give you the exercises, and you do the exercises until the pain goes away. And then when the pain goes away, when the pain comes back, you don't say, oh, hang on, I could do those exercises again. You think, oh, no, I'll call a physio again. So, yes.
So, Guy, how much... Yeah, the thing that I always find really interesting, we talked to a lot of guests on the show, is money. Is people's, is companies in action down to the fact they've got to spend money? Is if they had a bottomless pit of money, would it resolve a lot of these issues, or is money just a part of the whole reason why people don't get the right setups, Guy, and the right attention at work?
I think just availability of money is part of the issue. I also think it's actually about how organizations operate. So lots and lots of organizations, and I think, again, the bigger they get, and we deal with some massive organizations, the more siloed everything becomes. So actually, you know, when we first started looking at home working as a result of the pandemic, and I know I keep talking about COVID like it was yesterday, but it was a trigger point for all sorts of events we're now dealing with. I mean, we've been dealing with home workers for something like 20 years. So this was nothing new to us when suddenly the proportions were different. You know, we had one contract we'd just taken on. And when we took the contract on, they said, this was in the December before COVID came, they said, well, almost no home workers, it's nearly all office. 5 months later, it was almost no office workers and all home. So that's all changed, and that came as a bit of a shock to people. But I thought, well, actually, if people are reducing real estate, cutting out the number of buildings, consolidating, then wouldn't it be really good if they took the budget that they're saving from that and actually allocated a great big lump of it to the ergonomics, and just under a well-being, you know, a properly strategic program of well-being, which would include ergonomics alongside whatever else is needed. But of course, that doesn't happen because that's and it's the difference between capex and day-to-day expenditure and all those other issues. And so I think a lot of it, the money, if it was actually sensibly spent, should be readily available, because you can. I think in the ergonomics community, there's never been any really, really strong evidence that you could sort of categorically say, if you spend, you know, if you get somebody's posture sorted out, you will get X% productivity. There's all sorts of research on presenteeism. We talk about productivity, but nobody's yet, and it may be out there. And actually, I use ChatGPT constantly to search for research that would take me days to find, and it comes back 30 seconds later. And I haven't asked it the question. But the stuff and I will now, but actually, is there any definitive proof of, do sit-stand desks improve productivity? Do better chairs improve productivity? That sort of thing. And the reason I think there probably isn't anything really strong is the answer is probably we all, as a gut feeling, say, yes, they do. It's sort of intuitively obvious. But the problem then happens, and sit-stand is a classic example of that. The number of organizations we deal with where they've all got sit-stand, but barely anybody's using them because there's no culture, there's no awareness, there's no training. All of those things that actually you need to keep reinforcing. Or where we've been most successful with organizations is where we have champions. Usually somebody who finds a sit-stand desk is an enormous help to them because of the previous back injuries and because they are the people who do keep doing those exercises and do know if they start to get back pain, they need to up the exercises. Those sort of people are brilliant. But if you've got somebody with a load of back pain in a culture where nobody stands up, if they have low self-esteem or they're introvert or whatever it happens to be, they're just going to suffer in silence because they don't want to be the one standing up when nobody else is. So all of these things potentially can help. But actually, I think probably the simple answer is it often becomes a money conversation, Stephen. But actually, it's not part of a much bigger strategy. And then you come back.
100% agree with that.
Everybody wants a cheat sheet because actually that means they don't have to think about a strategy.
Yeah. I'm going to give the analogy of, and I don't know whether you've ever read, probably not, but if you've ever read Bono's book, that he didn't write it. It was a set of conversations with a French journalist, Michael Onassis, and there's a whole section in there about Live Aid. We all remember Live Aid.
Yeah.
Okay. But there was if we think about Live Aid as this kind of pivotal moment in history where we believed we could raise all of this money and we could send this over to Africa and we could solve this problem that was going on. And as a bit where Bono's talking and he said, yeah, and then me and Bob went over to Africa and there was this thing that suddenly hit them that this was so much bigger than people starving right now and getting food and aid and whatever in, so there was a naivety in that, right?
Yeah.
And that's where he then changed his kind of, rightly or wrongly, sort of changed his sort of direction into politics and trying to, cancel debt, etc. But the point was, they realized that one had to look at a much, much, much bigger picture in order to do it. And I feel like the same thing has kind of happened with a whole of workplace well-being and human factors as well. It's and going back to that lady that I spoke to yesterday, who's like trying to focus on purpose and intent, and how do we want to see our lives embedded with work, and how do we just want to live better? I just feel like we don't go there with work. What we don't ask quite often, or what organizations don't ask, is how is work working? How we've always done it. Is it always, does it always have to be like that? And that the cultural silos as well haven't helped with that. And I feel like moving forward, we need to break down those silos. I wrote a piece this morning, first thing, because I watched the thing about Tudor Christmases last night.
Okay.
Don't know. Did anyone else see that?
No, I didn't see it.
No.
It was so interesting.
Is it worth watching? Is it worth us finding it on iPlayer?
No. Yes, it is. Absolutely. absolutely. So it was mainly focused around Henry VIII and how in his reign he celebrated Christmas, but then it went on. But the kind of tenuous link that I was pushing on there was Christmas was celebrated in such a different way in Tudor times, and that's in our history. That's not a huge amount of time, right? In the history of mankind, that's 200 years, right? You're not looking at an awful lot of time there, but also, straight up, following on from Henry VIII's reign, when we get into Cromwell, we didn't have Christmas. It was cancelled, right? Christmas didn't exist, and we grow up with Christmas now. You see how I'm bringing it back to Christmas to keep it festive. We grow up thinking that like almost all of the traditions of Christmas and everything are the way that it's just always been. Father Christmas has always been there, and we do this and we do that, but actually a lot of those things are very, very, very recent things in our history. And I almost feel like we're at that verge with work now, where there's a lot of things that we do in work which we just feel like we've always done. But we forget that actually in the past there have been massive industrial revolutions, etc. And I feel like, we just have to constantly come back to work and go, actually, is the way that we did it this year, last year, the year before, is that now still working? Right. And that's
I think there's a few things I'm going to pick through that. I mean, first of all, the Live Aid thing. And I was just thinking, as you said that, I remember Bob Geldof was so passionate about it. He used the F word on live TV. And I remember being really shocked by that. Now, if you watch any modern drama, the F word crops up within the first 4 or 5 minutes tops, and it's a commonplace. But that was the first thing. But the point was, it demonstrated his passion. He was almost sort of shouting at people on TV saying, just get out there and donate. That was really his thing. And I think you do need that. You need the passion. You need that naivety, because that naivety doesn't see the obstacles that are there. And sometimes the pure energy and the not seeing them, will actually push through. Sometimes it's not back. And I was going to bring that into the fact we've had interns in the past. And one of the things I found utterly refreshing was their naivety, because they come in not knowing, they come out, they're undergraduates, so educated young people, bright kids, ready to sort of take on the world at the start of their career. And some of the things they would say, I think, actually, we're going to go through this. I know it's not going to work, because what they're suggesting from experience, we've tried that in the past, it was a waste of time, but we go through just for them to actually understand the process. But sometimes I'm saying, well, no, hang on a minute, actually, and I can't, off the top of my head, I know this happened, I can't remember a specific experience, but I just say, well, actually, let's just explore this, because I'm saying, no, that won't work. But it's probably 10 years since we've done it, and maybe things have changed. And I wanted to bring that into a worry I have for the future. And that is I've been spending a lot of time looking at AI and all sorts of interesting sort of background to it and what possible impact it has and where it works. And there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting. And going back to podcasts, The Rest is Politics. Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart had a guy on recently, he was an economist, I can't remember his name, who was saying where AI is absolutely optimal for a business is where it's used to enhance human endeavor. And what's wrong at the moment is most organizations are using it to replace human endeavor. Now, there's already evidence that is, if you're going to use AI, you're going to use it for the lowest skilled, least experienced jobs. So the job market is changing. There's other elements in the UK, specifically with national insurance and all sorts of other things, which I won't get into the politics of that. But specifically, the impact of AI is meaning that those startup jobs, those internship type jobs, are just not there in the volumes they were. And so I worry that we're actually, those young, naive people are going to come in with all that energy and all that enthusiasm, and that not seeing the brick walls are in front of them. And some will get stopped by the brick wall, but if you don't see it, there's a chance you will just smash through it and not even realize it's there. That sort of opportunity of young people coming in and having that impact, I worry we're going to miss that. And then we're also going to have, if we've had a period of just not getting the intake of young people, aside from the unemployment issues for young people potentially in the quite near future, there's also actually what sort of a gap does that leave in a business? So I think AI has enormous potential in all sorts of ways. But I think we're doing, a lot of us are doing with AI what a lot of businesses have done since COVID. When we came out of the pandemic and people were working from home, there was loads of evangelical enthusiasm saying this is a great chance to completely rethink workplace. And what's happened? One by one, and bigger organizations, it goes back to, they haven't even bothered to get a cheat sheet out about how they might change it. They just said, let's just go back and do what we always did, because that's really easy. It's like the old expression that probably many people on this won't remember. A long time ago, before the PC, there was an expression, nobody ever got sacked for choosing IBM. I don't know if you remember that expression. IBM was a definitive computer supplier. It was all big mainframe and all the rest of it. But in big organizations, they got a lot of business because it was a safe, easy choice. And then the IBM PC came in and they sort of shot themselves a bit in the foot, a bit like Kodak and digital cameras.
Yeah.
They gave other people opportunities to come up with PCs, which did exactly what the IBM thing did. They were cheaper. A lot of them had. Do you remember Gateway was one of the big growing?
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant marketing there, sort of black and white Frisian, Farrell sort of logos.
Yeah.
And that completely disrupted it. And that did happen. And the PC came. And I think through, since the pandemic, we've had an opportunity for major change, which some organizations have grasped really successfully, but lots have just trickled or in the end stampeded back to the old way. And I worry that there are opportunities. I think there's all sorts of stuff is going to happen with AI, and I think there are genuine risks of loss of jobs, but I'm very much of the view that it will also, for every job loss that's drudge, that will create something that doesn't exist as a role anymore. But I just worry that this opportunity to get new people in with that energy, that enthusiasm, and I think naivety is a real plus when you've got, because it means you just think differently. It's all about taking a different view of things and coming at it from a different angle.
I was going to say, Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, said exactly the same thing. I don't know whether you've seen it, Guy, but there was an interview on the Radio 4 this morning, and he was saying his concern was young professionals not being able to get those entry-level jobs because of AI. So, echoing exactly what you've said there, that it's being recognised at a really senior level of the risk from AI for young professionals.
Well, I think what's really interesting is the way that AI is being touted and advertised to young professionals. I think that's even more interesting, because I've seen probably in the last 2 weeks about 20 adverts for AI, and every single one of those adverts, what it does is it shows a young professional saying, basically, I've come to work today and I don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
right? Because the AI is going to do it all for me. So there's one in particular where it's two young ladies discussing how they're going to spend all day deciding which of the different coffees that are available in the coffee machine they're going to try and drink, because the AI will do their work for them. Now something's amiss there. Either like there's lots of employers out there that are paying clever people with AI, and they're actually getting a load of rubbish out because it's the AI doing it, not the clever people, or they're actually just hiring people just to be a face, and the AI is doing the work. I don't know which way around it is, but then we need to come back down to, ultimately, if we talk about human factors, we need to come back down to human value. What's the value of a human in a situation rather than tech in a situation? And you know, companies that do things really well going forward are the ones that are going to come.
Yeah. I think I was reading an interesting article yesterday in a watch magazine of all things, but it was talking about how AI is impacting luxury brands. And they made a really interesting observation that I'd not thought through before, that actually, so this is not at entry level of businesses, it's at the top end level, is actually at C-suite level, that organizations are now getting to a point where so it's specifically in the watch context. If you're selling very expensive watches, most people don't just go out one day and say, I'll have that watch. They aspire to it. They think about it. It's the same with all sorts of other sort of premium goods, whether it's handbags or cars or whatever. And so they work towards it. And so in the luxury brand thing, it's really interesting to be able to pull data together of, you know, when did they first interact? Did they register on the website? Did they attend any events and all those sort of things? And again, car companies do that. They invite you to driving days and showroom launches, and, you know, all sorts of brands do that sort of thing to make people part of the community before they actually become a customer, to build them in that commitment. And what they were saying is organizations are now, you know, those premium brands are now able to pull together the data that actually tracks all manner of different factors and brings them all. This is where AI is together. You can pull data from all sorts of different places into one coherent sort of set. And they were saying, but what it doesn't yet, maybe it will, what it doesn't yet do is actually say, we've got that data. Now, what's our strategic plan with the business or that product range or that model? What is our strategic plan in the light of that much more informed opinion about where we are with it? So the data doesn't yet say, well, this is what I've found and this is what you've got to do, you know. Boost marketing. It doesn't say boost marketing on that, drop that product, change the price on that. It says, here it is, go figure. And so until senior management cope with that, and they talked about pilot inertia, where people, organizations, big organizations, doing lots and lots of AI pilots. Actually, they don't ever get out of them. They just say, well, we found some stuff, let's run another pilot. So actually, they're getting further and further behind the ones who really are out ahead on it. But so bringing that back, I think those people who are making those decisions need to be within organizations that have a complete mix of characters and individuals and personalities and all the rest of it. And if you're losing an age segment, then that's going to impact probably seriously detrimentally at some stage in the business cycle. I remember my brother, who's retired from the oil and gas business, back in the last recession in 2008-9, they laid off a lot of middle managers. And he said, when it all picks up again, we are going to be screwed, because all sorts of people. He lives in the state. He flew to Aberdeen to a guy who they were making redundant to spend a week with him to do what he called download. He said, I had to capture he said, I won't in a week. I had to capture as much as I possibly could of all the stuff this guy knew, because once he was gone, you know, we paid him off. That was it. And so we're going to have that situation where we're not going to have the insights from the young people coming in, the different perspectives that come from that naivety, from that different age perspective, a different life view because of where you are. That isn't just about age. That's whether, you know, are you single? Are you in your own home? Do you have children? All those other factors that tend to be generally sort of age related, but aren't specifically what generation you are. So we need to get, I'd
love to see in 2026, I'd love to see more organizations paying people to think. That's what I'd love to see. Right.
Yeah. Just a quick story.
Giving them time to think.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm saying. give people time to think. Use
Yeah.
all of this AI. Strip your processes of anything that literally AI. Give it to AI. Anything that people are doing that's a complete waste of their time, give it to AI, and then just give people back time and let them be clever with that time. And part of that is allow people to have conversations, like we were saying earlier.
Can I give you the answer to that?
Hmm.
Switch off social media.
Oh, there you go.
So, because all the time you're on social media, you are actually slowly but surely being drained of the capacity to think for yourself. Going back to what we were saying right at the beginning, there's all sorts of evidence. There's a lot of talk now. Australia have just banned mobiles, haven't they? For was it under 16? I think there's some interesting. There's I've forgotten her name. There's an actress who's very eloquent. It's no, I can't for the life of me think of her name, but she's Sophie something, can't think of her name, but she's speaking about, schools are proud of all this IT they've got for their kids and how brilliant the tech is and all the rest of it. Actually, the debate, her arguments are, there is no evidence to show that learning through computers rather than traditional ways produces any better results. And I think we are in a period where education seems to be being trained to achieve things, trained to pass exams rather than trained to have the capacity to think and learn and research. And I've just said, I don't research anymore. I chat GPT because it is so much quicker.
Well, do you know what? You've just confirmed that I'm doing the right thing going into 2026 because I'm not switching off social media because I don't think we can. But I agree. But I am reverse engineering it, and that's even cleverer. So, yeah, Stephen.
Quick story. Yes, just a quick story. Something Guy introduced luxury watches into the conversation. So just before we came, I was having a little throw.
You bought me and Guy Rolexes for Christmas. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, it's about Rolexes, but it was someone had put a post on LinkedIn about how they were giving a colleague every time a colleague has been there 10 years, they get given a Rolex, which was, and this ties in a lot of the things about workplace that we've discussed. But it was then interesting to start reading down the comments. And a lot of people were saying, actually, that employee may have no interest whatsoever in a Rolex. You'd have been better off actually taking them maybe out for them and their family out for a nice meal and engaging in conversation with them rather than buying them something that you think might be a good gift, but maybe you've no interest to them. And it just sort of tied the whole thing together around employees engaging with employees, conversations, that something that appears to be a good gesture actually might have no benefit or
although I'm going to say if you've got no interest in the Rolex, then you're just going to sell the Rolex and buy something that you have got interest in.
I know, but do you know what I mean? It was interesting that someone putting a gesture, and this ties into the whole thing around social media, someone talking about a good gesture instantly then brought back a lot of negative posts around that. It was just quite lots of different interesting things within that just one post that I'll try and find, and I'll put it in the comments for people to have a look at. It's
an interesting thought because they think that's an employer virtue signaling about how wonderful they are as an employer. And I'm not making any comparison, but one of the things we do, for example, when people have had a 10th anniversary with us, they get a week's extra holiday, which I think is much more valuable. And at 20 years, they get a week's extra holiday and a month's extra pay as well. So they've actually got the opportunity to do something with it. So, and it does seem to be an incentive. I think I've now got 4 people who've been with me over 20 years now. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I'm doing it right. Nobody's ever said, thank you, I don't want an extra week's holiday. That obviously that's an employer who's into his watches.
Yeah.
And again, he's putting his values on everybody else. Everybody wants a Rolex. And I'm into watches and I certainly don't want a Rolex. And, we won't get into the watch conversations and I don't have one and never will. And probably by the time I retire, probably won't have the debt. There will be some domestic budget conversations, which will probably mean Rolexes aren't on the domestic budget allowance. But no, it's an interesting point. It comes right back to, brings a full circle. Everybody's an individual.
Yep.
And you need to think about what would be the most satisfying for them.
Listen, this has been brilliant.
Yeah.
Conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I think we mentioned ergonomics 4 times, didn't we?
Loosely.
I think we mentioned and I'll use your words, I think we mentioned human factors all the way through this.
Yeah.
All the way through this. And I hope there's been a fair few people watching. I hope it's stimulated some thought going into 2026. We'll be back with a new format of this in 2026. We're aiming to do it once a month, trying to make it more of a super show with more guests, more kind of lively debate. But thank you for supporting us throughout 2025. Guy, thank you for being a fantastic last guest of this year.
Wish you being the last in this format. I didn't know that. So
there you go. Well, I thank you very much, and also wish you a very, very Merry Christmas. I hope you have a good time off. We will be back in 2026. Different format, but the same value. So until then, from all of us here, bye for now.
Bye-bye.